This is The Express with Gary Allen, your 360-degree view of the world. Now, here's your host, Gary Allen.
Hello and good evening, everybody, and welcome to this edition of The Express. Yes, indeed, I am Gary Allen, and I'm very tickled tonight. We have an interesting guest on, Mr. John Harper. He'll be joining us in just a couple of minutes, and I know he's there. He's on the line, and you'll understand why it's so special to have him on this show with me tonight as I get into the introduction. But for those of you that want to join me, you can get a hold of me on Facebook at Gary Allen, A-L-A-N. If you want to listen to any of my past shows, you can go to youtube.com at Gary Allen, A-L-A-N, The Express interviews. And as I have said before, you will run across the country guy, Gary Allen, but at the very same time, just fudge around there a little bit. And if you put in Gary Allen, the interviews, everything is great. This show will be repeated on Thursday night on diversitybroadcastnetwork.com and also on progressivevoices.com. It'll be sent to them immediately. So I'm excited about that. And for those of you out there, I want to say hello to Randy, a friend of mine who constantly listens, and thank you so very, very much. And to all of you, thank you for taking a few minutes out of your day, as you do every week, to join us here on The Express. Tonight is kind of an interesting show for me. This is a gentleman that I've known for over 40 years. He's one of my best friends in the whole world. He's a gentleman that I look up to. He's the president and owner of WMEL 1060, the Talk to Me station in Cocoa Beach, Florida. He has also been a mentor of mine. We went to college together. We didn't serve in the Air Force at the same time, but we did serve in the Air Force. John was my first program director. He was also the first program director to ever suspend me. For what, I don't remember, but I know that I was suspended. And if you don't get suspended or fired in this business in the first couple of years, there's something wrong with you. John has done everything in the radio business that one could possibly do. If you watch my Facebook posting today, you know that he's worked with some of the best that has ever been in the business. Why he works with me, I don't know, but he does. He is one of my dearest friends. He and Vern, his brother, are like family to me. They're like brothers to me. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. John Harper. And John, thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, Gary, it is a pleasure and an honor to be with you as well. And that was quite an introduction. I hope I can live up to it here during our interview.
Well, Randy West, who was a game show host and a gentleman in the show business community that I've known for a very, very long time, said that the introduction I gave to him is one that only a dead person deserves. And I said, well, Randy, it's a free world and we're live. You can do whatever you want. So, I got to meet him through Wink Martindale, who's also a dear friend of mine who will be joining me on this show before too long. John, you've been in the business for over 40 years. And I said, you served time in the Air Force like I did. Were you interested in getting into the radio business before you joined the military, or was it always an ambition of yours, or was it something that came along later when you got into your 20s?
Actually, Gary, it's 52 years that I've been in the business, and I first got involved, inflicted with the disease of broadcasting, if you want to call it that, when I was still in elementary school. I believe I was in the 5th grade when I attended a sock hop in the cafeteria at 54th Avenue Elementary School in St. Petersburg, Florida. And there was a disc jockey there, and I just was fascinated by what he was doing. And then shortly after that, my father, Vern's father too, we had the same father.
I hope so.
Yes. Took us to a radio and a TV station in St. Petersburg. It was WSUN radio, 620 on the dial, and WSUN TV, channel 38, and took us there, and that was kind of all she wrote. I never wanted to do anything else in my life other than to be in broadcasting, and it's still that way today. It's been a good ride for me.
Yeah, and as you well know, because I'm going to be over there tomorrow doing some stuff. Once you love being in the studio, there's very little that'll ever drag you away from it. Even family can't drag you away if that's what you truly love. I think we're like athletes. They like the gym, we like the studios, It just.
Well, that's true. That's Gary, kind of a good way to put it. But the creativity, the innovations that you can come up with in the studio, the things you can do. But as I said, for me, it dates back to when I was in the 5th grade. That's when it all started, and then things kind of started to progress from there at that point.
You and I met while we were in college, and I said you were my very, very first program director at the college radio station. And by the way, you and I both got influenced to get into this business very similar. Before I get into that question, I saw Rick Shaw, who came to, for those of you who don't know, Rick Shaw was part of when everything was on AM. FM didn't even exist. But Rick Shaw came to my junior high school, and he was playing records with the gold jacket on.
I was just tonight listening to an air check of Rick Shaw's on WQAM in Miami. Just tonight, about 4 hours ago, and it was really kind of cool to hear that and listen to. He was a great talent. Retired, I believe, a couple of years ago, and I guess he's still doing some freelance stuff, but a great talent and quite an institution in the Miami-Fort Lauderdale market in radio and television.
Yes, he was, and he influenced me. He came in, and I thought, oh, that's so cool, the gold jacket, he's spinning records. Wow. Unfortunately, I got sidetracked because I still wanted to follow in my dad's footsteps to be an airline pilot, but that never came to fruition, and about the time I met you in college is when I decided broadcasting was for me, and things took off. What was your first impression? As you said earlier, when you went to the radio station in Tampa? Was it one of these, gosh, where are all these buttons and all this crazy stuff? Was it just like overwhelming to you, but you knew you had to do it?
Yeah, that kind of was the way it went, Gary. And I remember to this moment, one of the things that struck me was the fact that back in those days in broadcasting, radio and TV, and in showbiz in general, in acting and in singing, everybody smoked. As you well know, everybody smoked, or virtually everybody. 9 out of 10 people in the industry smoked. And I remember being in the studios of WSUN TV on the St. Petersburg Municipal Pier, and the smell of cigarettes throughout the entire control room, throughout the building. Now, that didn't influence me. And by the way, I never did smoke, but no. I can remember that smell. Kind of a musty smell mixed with the air conditioning at the time, and that's a memory I have. But to further answer your question, I was impressed with all the bells and whistles and the cameras, the lighting, how you can be there in the studio and be speaking. Back in those days, Gary, booth announcers did all of the announcing live. There was nothing recorded. So during every commercial break, it was all done live. And I thought that was cool. The excitement of being in the moment was really something that turned me on as well. So there were many different aspects of the industry of both radio and television that I found absolutely fascinating, and it just really struck me that way, leading up to my first job in the industry.
What was your first job?
That was a good lead-in.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. I am paying attention.
Actually, Gary, I was attending a parade in downtown St. Petersburg. They have a big event there every year called the Sunshine Festival. And this particular radio station that I ended up working for was called WLCY, and it was the station of the market. It was like WADC in New York, so many other huge stations around the country, KBC in Los Angeles, KGO in San Francisco, WLS. I shouldn't forget WLS. Right. But it was the WLS of the Tampa Bay area. And the news director at the time, his name was Bill David, was doing a live broadcast from the parade. And I went up to him, and I in somehow, way, shape, or form or another, said, Mr. David, I'd love to have a job at the radio station or something to that effect. And he told me to go out to the radio station and speak to a gentleman named Roy Nelson, who was the program director. And that was about a week or two later. And they hired me, and my first job on WLCY Fun Radio was to work on Sunday morning from 4 a.m. until 12 noon. And what I would do in that particular time slot, that 8-hour shift, was I was responsible for playing back all of the public service programs, usually most of them half-hour in length, playing back the church programs. Every radio and TV station was required, Gary, to air X amount of hours per week of public service programming. And so that was my first job, playing back these 8 hours worth of public service programs on WLCY Fun Radio. Other than that, as I said, we were the WLS of the Tampa Bay area.
What did you get paid, John, just out of curiosity?
Yeah. In fact, I still have my first dollar, believe it or not. I got paid $1.25 an hour.
$1.25 an hour. Wow.
Yeah.
That almost sounds like my first job out of college, and also when I was doing some interns, because they pay interns now in some places. But wow, that is something. You have worked in a number of cities. You've worn a lot of different hats. As I said in the introduction, you've worked with a lot of really wonderful, wonderful people. What are your fondest memories and some of the people that you worked with over the years?
Well, there have been so many that I have worked with, Gary, and come in contact in so many different ways and means of people who helped me along the way, and the hundreds, if not maybe, I don't know, thousands of people that, I don't know if it's in the thousands, but the hundreds of people that I've helped over the years get a start in the business as well. Probably there are several people, several interesting stories on the top of that list, and I guess most of those probably originate from Detroit. And in Detroit, where I was the assistant program director, later became the program director, and I was the last general manager at WXYZ in Detroit. That's a story later on. But when I was there, we had a morning talk show, morning talk, news, and sports, and we had a gentleman on there who did shtick, and he did voices. He attempted to do comedy, and I remember him coming to me one day and saying, John, can I borrow $50 from you and I'll pay you back, but it's kind of tight for me right now. So I loaned him the money, and he went on to continue to do shtick and did other things. We were owned, Gary, by ABC Radio and TV out of New York. And kind of fast-forwarding the story for you, there was a program that originated at WXYZ TV called Kelly and Company. And they would have all types of stars come in to be interviewed on that particular morning talk show. And it wasn't unlike any other market around the country. I'm sure every market had, back in those days, Good Morning Orlando, Good Morning Cleveland, Good Morning Flint, or whatever it was. And as I said, this was Kelly and Company. And they went on vacation once, and this particular person that I got started filled in for them and was recognized by the management in ABC TV in New York. They called him in. He pitched an idea for a show, and that show later went on to become one of the most popular shows ever to be in television and on ABC TV. The name of the person, everybody knows him as Tim the Toolman Allen, Tim Allen.
Yeah.
And it was tool time. And that was interesting how that all kind of developed from him doing shtick, as I said, on our morning talk show on WXYZ in Detroit.
Wow. And I got to tell you, I met him a number of times and when I lived in Los Angeles, and he's really a very, very nice gentleman. He really, really is. And yeah, he likes to do a lot of crazy shtick and stuff. And sort of like what I do when I'm on the station over there with you from time to time, or one of your other guests.
Very similar.
I love to do shtick. Unfortunately, my producer here won't let me do that much shtick. So I've got to stick to just asking questions and doing stories and stuff like that. Now I have this question is going to come back up towards the end of the show, but for a different reason. What was when you were young and getting started, what was the best advice that you got at that particular point in time that helped you continue to move forward?
Wow, Gary, that's a good question. But my answer is not really a good one to that question, in the fact that I really didn't get a whole lot of advice from anyone. I was kind of on my own, and I had to make it or break it on my own. There were some disc jockeys who helped me along the way early on in my career, but as far as any words of advice, any sage advice or anything like that, Gary, I can't really tell you too much of anything. Basically, I was on my own, and that's why I think throughout the years I tried to help so many people, because nobody helped me. Yeah. I had to do it on my own. So that's why I tried to extend a hand to many people to help them up along the way.
Yeah, and it's something that I said last week with my guest, Chris DePetta, who owns the Punchline in Atlanta, and I've known for years. I said it was Ed McMahon who taught me very young in my life. And, of course, my Uncle Tubby, who performed on Miami Beach forever, they both had the adage. Yes, you've got to give back for the success that you've had. Now, you may not be rich, you may not have a lot of money, but if you give back, if you keep priming the pump, helping other people move along with words of wisdom or whatever the case may be, I believe in that wholeheartedly. I know the advice that you gave me in college when you first heard me on the radio. You said, you really should get into the garment business. So I know it's a joke. It's a joke, of course. It's a joke. You should go in the garment business. You should go in the garment business. Yeah, I didn't take that advice. Anyway, I just got a warning from my producer that they do have hail in the San Antonio area. So if we lose everybody, we apologize. We can't necessarily get going with Mother Nature and all that. But over in San Antonio and Texas, they are going through it. But John, you've worked, excuse me, in a lot of stations, like I said, and you've worn many hats. What has always been your favorite before we get into your ownership, which you've had for a number of years now? What was your favorite thing to do as either a reporter, talk show host, or on-air personality? What was your favorite to do?
Well, Gary, again, a good question, and the way I answer that is here at WMEL on the Space Coast of Florida, I was able to fulfill a dream that I had ever since, again, dating back to where I started in elementary school in wanting to be in the broadcasting business. Mm-hmm. And back in those days, I wanted to do one of three things. I wanted to be the president of the United States. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be an astronaut, and I wanted to report on the space program. And as I like to tell people whenever I talk to them and they ask me a similar type of question, I accomplished two out of the three. Mm-hmm. I became president of my own company, and I've been able to report on back when the shuttle was flying, I reported on 25 years worth of shuttle flights from the Kennedy Space Center. I kind of personally did that myself, kind of as a hobby, but have a special interest as well. So, like I said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. The only thing I didn't accomplish was becoming an astronaut.
Well, you didn't become president of the United States either, but at the same time, I don't think we could go with Tom Brokaw being in the White House. So,
No,
And,
but a play on the words. I became president of my own company.
yes, you did. Yes, you did. Yes,
so,
you did. And you.
So go ahead.
No, go ahead, John.
No, so being able to accomplish that, that probably from a personal achievement standpoint, that was very important, and being able to do all that. I remember early mornings being out at the Kennedy Space Center for some of those shuttle flights that used to occur at 3 a.m. in the morning, 4 a.m., 6 a.m., whatever, and thinking to myself, wow, this is unreal. I'm actually here, and I'm reporting on something that as a little kid growing up, I always wanted to be involved with. So that was pretty neat, and enjoyed being able to do that.
And you still do it. Your station still covers all the launches.
Yeah.
And
we
to this
did
very
it
day.
Past Friday night.
Yeah.
So we did that. I was part of the broadcast team. I'm slowly giving those duties over to other people in the radio station, trying to bring them along and make them be a bigger part of our space reporting activities, and taking over from me. I've been doing it for so many years. I'm trying to get several different people involved with reporting and bringing their own style to our space reports, our launches, our launch coverage, play-by-play, as I call it. And so I played a very minor role on Friday night, but Friday afternoon. But nonetheless, we cover every rocket launch right now, and we are really looking forward a couple of years down the road when we'll be able to send Americans back into space on our own rockets from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station and from the Kennedy Space Center.
Yes, and I know that from time to time I've come over and done some. I didn't do any launches yet, but I've done some things, man on the street interviews for you, and gone to festivals and fairs and things like that. So I always enjoy that, because the people over in the Cocoa Beach area where you are with WMEL 1060, and you can also catch them 1060WMEL.com, where the shows are all streamed if you want to listen to that. And from time to time you might catch my voice on there. John, you've owned WMEL in one form or another. Call letters are always the same, but the where you can find it on a dial has changed over the years. What's it like for you as an owner? I mean, I see you some days, and I know it's all encompassing, and I know you have a lot of responsibility, and I know you try to delegate that as much as possible. You have a great program director in Vince Young. But what's it like for you, and what was it like when you first owned WMEL, which was down in Melbourne at that time?
Well, I think, Gary, owning a radio station in this day and age is kind of like being on a tightrope and operating without a net. That's kind of what it's like. It's ever changing. Every day there's something different, and you try to stay ahead of things that are happening in the industry of broadcasting, specifically radio, or breaking that down even further, talk radio. So trying to be aware of what's happening in the industry is very important. Of course, at my position, my level, sales is very important for the overall radio station. Promotion is important. There's so many elements that come into play, and you've got to be responsible and on top of all of them, so to speak, at the same time. So it's spinning a lot of plates, like on the old Ed Sullivan show. You're spinning a lot of plates and trying to keep them going without dropping any of them all at the same time. So it's a pretty encompassing position and a situation to be in. It's very rewarding, because there's really no other industry that can come close to being involved in radio or television. So I think, Gary, that's very important and very special, and that's kind of what keeps so many of us, and yourself as well, going, because we're in a very unique and individual type of position.
Yeah, I think so too. Why did you choose talk? I know that's your background, news, talk, radio, but why not music or something along those lines that you could have accomplished?
Good question again, Gary. You ask good questions. So
well, I get paid the big bucks here.
The reason I chose talk, and that's an interesting story. How much time do we have here?
Well, we've John. We're going till 11 o'clock. So hang.
We're there. We're going till 11. All right. Okay,
yeah, we're on till 11, John. I know that's past your bedtime and me too, but nevertheless, we're there. We're there. But no, I mean, I've known you ever since I've known you. You've always done talk. The only time you ever did music that I'm aware of was in college when you were my program director and you suspended.
When I started in the business at WLCY Fun Radio, I was a disc jockey there. In fact, I'm very pleased. I still have my first air check, or for people who may not be familiar with that term, my first tape, my first recording of when I was on the air, and so that's very special. But to get back to your question as to why talk all these years, back in 1972, I wanted to go to a bigger market, and so I really, on a whim, on a Saturday, drove from the Tampa Bay area to Miami, and I walked into a radio station there called WKAT Talk Radio. We were known then as the Young Talk of Miami, and we were located on Miami Beach, and a station that was steeped in all types of history. We could do another hour on the history that was associated with WKAT.
Yes.
But I became infected, so to speak, with talk radio when I walked into those studios. And it was far more challenging, far more complicated than just being a disc jockey. And I'm not taking anything away from being a disc jockey. It's a very rewarding position in our industry. But doing talk radio and all the things involved with talk radio are far more intricate than they are with music radio. So back in those days, in 1972, Gary, believe it or not, WKAT in Miami Beach, Miami, was one of five, count them, five radio stations in the country that was doing talk radio. The others were in San Francisco, Los Angeles, which is where many people say talk radio started, New York, and in Chicago. So that was four. We were the fifth market to be doing talk radio, and that was really intriguing and very special to me. So with my early beginnings at WKAT Talk Radio, I really became part of what I like to refer to as being an architect in the industry of talk radio. When you think about it, Gary, five radio stations then doing talk versus tonight as we speak, there are probably, I'm going to guess, I haven't seen the latest numbers, I'm going to guess there are probably 1,500 stations throughout the country that are doing some form of talk radio. So I was kind of an architect of talk radio and very proud of that as well. I was a contributing member, I should say. I wasn't the guy that invented talk radio or anything like that, but I was one of the people in the trenches when things were starting to become formulated in talk radio, and that to this day is very special. So to finally get around to answering your question, I think that really is the whole reason, because back in those days, it was just very challenging, and I've always enjoyed the challenge of talk radio. Talk radio is kind of like running a news department and a TV station where things change constantly, 24/7. You get to go places that you would not be able to go if you were a disc jockey. You can do so many different things with talk radio, and that's why I've stayed with it all these years.
Yeah, and I briefly, as you were talking, because I interned, as you know, at WIOD, which was on 79th Street in Miami, and of course the call letters were WIOD, and they were the wonderful Isle of Dreams, and I interned for Larry King. So when you said earlier that a guy borrowed $50 from you, I thought you knew Larry King too. But that's an inside joke, folks, between John and I. We both know it. But But I was fascinated by talk radio, and I also did some work at WINZ as I went to work for Zeta when FM first came along. Yes, folks, there was a time when FM radio did not exist. But John, talk a little bit about talk radio back then as compared to what the young people and people in the audience in general listen to today. We know, and people of our age bracket, we know what real talk radio was back then and what I feel it still should be. But talk a little bit about that in comparison to what we see today.
Well, going back to those days of talk radio, those days being the early days back in the early 70s, as I said, when talk radio first started in 1970, 71, 72. By the way, can I tell the story of, take just a moment, of it's one of the theories as to how talk radio started. Let me
go ahead.
Let me tell you that. I think your listeners would find this interesting. Many of your listeners, Gary, are familiar with a gentleman. Unfortunately, he's deceased, but he was a brilliant gentleman who did a talk show for decades. His name was Gene Shepherd. And Gene Shepherd, a lot of people know Gene. He's become kind of a cult hero these days because he's the person who wrote and narrates a movie that everybody is starting to watch now every Christmas season called The Christmas Story.
Yes.
And Gene Shepherd was a disc jockey at a station, a big station in those days, at Paterson, New Jersey, called WPAT. And as the story goes, Gene Shepherd was on the air back in those days as a disc jockey, and the turntables, they had some type of power failure or something, and the turntables went out. They weren't working. So what Gene Shepherd started to do was he would take album covers, and from those album covers, he would start making stories, relating stories, talking about them, and that is one theory as to how talk radio really started. It was the mother of invention, so to speak, when the turntables went out and Gene Shepherd had to fill the time, and that's how many think talk radio then started to develop from those years, early in, that was probably in the 60s.
Yeah.
But to get back to your question, Gary, as to talk radio then compared to now, in some respects, it has not changed in some respects. In other respects, it's dramatic as far as the changes. Things are much quicker. Back in those days, talk show hosts used to keep the same boring guest, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 hours. And that's something that has changed over the decades, where for the most part, a guest on a talk show won't be on longer than 1 hour. So I guess I won't be on longer than an hour on your show. But so that's changed. Topics have gotten a lot different. Sports has come into talk radio as a very vital role in what sports radio does on radio stations throughout the country today. So there are many different byproducts of just talk radio. There's health talk, there's nutritional talk, sports talk, as we mentioned. You can go down the list of different types of topics and shows, and it's much more niche-oriented than it used to be back in the days when I started at WKAT in Miami.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, the thing that I miss the most, you're talking about sports radio, is that if you listen to sports radio today, it seems like it's always the same voice, the same guy. Now it isn't, but there's no longer the fun guys of radio. When you and I were working in Miami and going to school, there was a gentleman that I admired a great deal, and I never had a chance to meet him, but I loved his broadcasts very much, and that was Sonny Hirsch. And I also miss the Harry Careys of the world. I miss the local guys doing sports. I miss the local guys on radio. I think that even political talk has gotten to the point sometimes, John, where it's hateful, It's wrong. It's screaming and yelling. And, I remember when Larry King would do shows, and he would have a lot of guests on and a lot of his friends that owed him money and, or he owed them money. But I think it's changed so much that now everything is corporate. Everything is gone. It's got to have the same sound, got to have the same vibe going for it, whether it's this guy or that guy talking. And I miss that local kind of feel for radio, that textured feeling that you'd have, because you'd see, Sonny Hirsch out with people. You'd see Larry King at a restaurant. You'd see different people, your local announcers. And I think that's the one thing that's been missing is the local identity of some stations, because a lot of shows now are syndicated throughout the country due to the big companies, which we will get to a little bit later on, which brings up, John.
You mentioned Gary, Sonny Hirsch, and
yes.
You didn't know this, but Sonny and I were very, very close friends. Unfortunately, Sonny passed away at this point, I guess, about 15 years ago now.
Yeah.
But Sonny is one of the few individuals that I attribute to what I call my DNA in this industry. And Sonny gave me a lot of the same wit and charisma that he had in his personality. And another gentleman who would share that same thought is Chris Myers from Fox Television Sports.
Yes.
Chris and I both many times talk about Sonny, because Chris was with me as well at WKAT, and Sonny was very instrumental in our early lives of developing personalities on radio.
Yeah, I think that, I used to sit back and listen and think about what it would be like to work in radio. And then when I got the internships when I was in college, and I got to work, with Big Wilson, and I got to work with Larry King, and I got to work with some of the other local people, and at WINZ learning how to rip and read news copy, etc. These are the people you look up to and you idolize them forever. I will always be grateful to Larry for a lot of the things that he taught me as a talk show host and understanding the market in which you live. And the people like that, I think, are sadly missed. I truly believe that, John, that the local guy that you can just say, hey, how you doing, Sonny? And it's these corporate guys they're not as friendly as they used to be. And I think that's what's missing. John, the FCC lifted its ban on how many radio stations one can own in any particular market. The major corporations came in and start buying radio stations left and right, AMs, FMs, even television. It put a damper on things as far as competition was concerned. The sales, now it was monopolized. Talent was syndicated, and they didn't have to worry about where the advertising dollar was going to go through. What's your perspective on that since it occurred all those years ago? Because it took away the mom and pops, the small, the KAT, the WINZs, the other stations that used to really be the ones you turn on. How do you feel about what has happened to that, and where do you think it's going?
Well, I remember when the first company to start doing all this was Clear Channel, now known as iHeartRadio. And I remember about 20 years ago when all of a sudden they came on the scene, and we locally owned and operated stations such as mine and others around the state, around the country, were kind of freaked out, thinking, what's going on here? Is this going to put us out of business? But all these years later, many local stations like mine, WMEL, are still surviving, still making it, and able to compete even up against these stations that have staffs bigger than mine by tenfold, if not more, and we're still able to make it happen. We keep a more local approach to what we do on the air, and I think stations that do that are able to survive and thrive. So that's the emphasis we put on our programming, Gary, is to be as local as we can and try to touch as many lives as we can from a local content. Content is king. That's what it's all about, and that's what makes stations really thrive. And it's that local personality. It's the many of the things that you do, Gary, on our radio station, help to personalize it, give it a warm, friendly type of feeling. And those are the things that are part of why I mentioned earlier DNA when it comes to the industry of broadcasting. And I still try to make that happen in our product today. Our product, what comes out of the speakers, is our most important thing that we do. And I'm on the front line every day making sure that product is where it needs to be and trying to make sure we can put the best programming on the air that we possibly can. You know, many times I say, Gary, it doesn't make any difference if you're AM, FM, TV, UHF, VHF, shortwave, tin can, whatever it is. Yeah. It is content that really runs a radio or a TV station, and that's what it's all about, content. And that's why you and this particular show are doing well, and I know you're looking to do other things as well, but it's because of the local flavor that you try to put into your talk show. When I say local, I don't mean you're not just talking about politics in somebody's hometown. You're worldwide with your particular talk show, but your personality brings that warmth, that friendliness to it, that feeling like you can reach out and your personality comes out through the speakers. And that's what makes the difference between a person doing talk radio who makes it and someone who doesn't make it. And that's why you're doing so well, and I'm very proud of you for doing that.
Well, you are someone, and I'm going to tell this story. I wasn't going to, but I'm going to tell it anyway. John and I were not in contact for a number of years when I went to Los Angeles as a young actor. And when I came back to South Florida, well, I had lived in Chicago as well. I worked in the political arena. But when I came home in South Florida to take care of my mom and dad, and John, you know the struggles I went through there, one of the first people that I contacted was you. You were surprised. You were shocked. And I told you the influence that you had on me as a young man we have similar backgrounds in the sense of the military, et cetera. But the influence that you had on me and the pride that I take in having you as my dear friend has always set with me well because of who you are and what you stand for. And I think that goes on with the people at WMEL, 1060 over there on the Space Coast. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm hoping to be a bigger part of what's going on over there, because everyone on the air there does an incredible job. And it's all run by you and Vince Young and Vern Harper, who I have the utmost love for as a brother. And but I think your influence has been one of the great ones, not only in my life, but I think in everybody's life that has ever had anything to do with you. And I love you, my dear friend, for it. And I'm not going to go too far, but I just wanted to read this to you because I got this today, John, from the Edison Research Corporation. This was research done on all the types of communication that you can listen to, AM, FM. And according to this, the study included 11,000 people who say that for 20 minutes a day or more, they listen to AM or FM radio, talk FM or AM radio. Another affirmation that radio remains king on the road comes courtesy of a data from Edison Research. Hacking the commuter code study, according to the numbers, 9 in 10 commuters in a quantitative online survey said that they use AM and FM radio in their cars, far exceeding the number 2, which is CDs and some of the other forms of communication. And also streaming live and internet stuff is also considered part of that. But I thought you'd be interested in that, John, in the fact that AM and FM radio is still talk radio, is still considered king by most broadcast radio. Yeah, go ahead.
Gary, that report that you're reading from echoes what I've been saying for so many years, and there have been other reports similar to that as well that are very, very impressive when it comes to the amount of people in our country, Americans, over the age of 12 years of age, or they rated from 12 to 65. Right. But something like 93% of Americans listen for a percentage of time during the course of a day, a week, to radio, whether it be AM or FM, makes no difference. They're listening to the radio. And that number, Gary, has not gone down. That number, in fact, has maintained. If not, I believe last year it went up a percentage point. And that's very impressive when you put radio up against television, newspapers, internet, everything else that is available out there. And radio is still not only maintaining our audience, it actually increased. Year to date, as I said, I think 1% of an increase from 92 to 93%. That is a huge number, Gary, that no other medium can compete with and say that they've got the same thing going for them. So we as an industry of radio, and whether our brothers and sisters are in other AM stations or FM stations around the country, makes no difference. We should be very proud of what's going on in our industry, despite all of the naysayers, despite all the people who think that we're going to die along with motion pictures. Look at the resurgence that motion pictures have had over the past decade or so. And that's gone crazy when everybody thought that movies were done because of the internet and online streaming and things like that. So, again, we're very proud of what you started to mention, Gary, as far as the numbers, who is listening to radio, and that is very impressive indeed.
Oh, yeah, and even it goes on further to say here, John, that broadcast radio also came out on top when commuters were asked what they listen to most in their car, and more than half of them said they listen to AM or FM radio, talk radio. It's not going anywhere, and it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. And I'm, what is this? Okay. According to my producer, we're all clear of hail in San Antonio, so that's great. So we shouldn't have any more problems with that. I'd like to let my listeners know exactly what's going on when we hear of it. John, that was my question about terrestrial radio. Where do you think it's going? I mean, you and I have talked about this in Vern at length when we've been together, and probably will again tomorrow when I'm over there. But where do you think it's going? And I bring that in conjunction with the next question, which is more and more of the large companies, and we're not going to mention any of them. You mentioned one earlier, iHeart. They're failing. They're having financial difficulties. CBS is selling off all their radio stations, or at least that was the latest report that I got. And they're failing all across the country, left and right. Every 6 months to a year, there's massive layoffs. Do you think things are going to get back to the way we knew it back then, 25, 30 years ago, where the local station has the local news, the local personalities, and the international or the national syndicated shows? They aren't going to go away totally, but we're going to depend a little bit more on the local stuff than we do or we have?
Well, first of all, and I want to elaborate on what you just asked, but first of all, these stations that are failing, as you alluded to, they're not failing because the industry is failing. They're failing because their companies simply, basic premise of the business, their companies overextended themselves and bought too much. Bought hundreds, if not thousands, of radio stations, and they're not able to service the debt. So that's what's going on with those. But to answer your question, will we ever get back to what we had 20 and 30 years ago, if not more? And I don't think, Gary, we'll ever see that again, unfortunately. In my opinion, I think radio is always evolving, ever-changing, but it's not going to get back to what it once was because we share so many other different types of platforms with everything else that's out there now. Everything from, you can go down the list yourself, but television, internet, podcast, the list goes on, let alone billboards vying for looking at them, magazines, newspapers, which, of course, all of those that I mentioned are down in their listenership, or I should say in their readership and viewership But again, radio is up, so an impressive point to say. But will we ever see what we had back in the roaring 60s?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say no from that regard. However, will radio maintain, if not increase, in its relevance once again in a local community? And that is a resounding yes, as long as the management of that radio station gives its staff the ability, the authority to operate and be creative with what they're doing on the air. If their hands are tied, that's not going to make it happen. But if they're allowed to be creative, it will thrive and flourish into the type of thing that people once enjoyed many years ago. So,
yeah, I think that's what's missing with some of these large corporations that have owned radio stations. It's all syndicated. It all sounds the same from one show to the next, even though the personalities change. It's the same stuff. That's what I love about local radio. I want to now talk about something that's very important to you and to me, because it is the lifeblood of every radio station, whether you're syndicated programming or whether you're local programming, and that's the talent on the air. When you hear someone on a radio station or they send you a demo tape and they're looking for a position, and normally it's you give them about 45 seconds of a listen, and then whether you know or not, what is it that you're listening for? What is it you want to hear? And what type of person are you looking for to come on WMEL?
I think, Gary, I'm looking for an entertainer, somebody who can entertain an audience. Somebody, the voice is not really all that important as it would be in music radio, perhaps. But in talk radio, I'm looking at the entertainment factor. I'm looking at the ability of that person, whether it be a man or a woman, to have a wow factor with the types of show that they put together. And also something, Gary, that is very, very important when it comes to choosing a good talk show host, and that is very simply the world experiences of he or she, that person who is on the air, and how they can react, how they can respond, how they can talk with authority and intelligence about different issues and things that are happening in the news today. So the background of someone on the air or someone I'm looking for is very important, and that carries a lot of weight. That's probably 60% of what I'm looking for.
What about when you were doing as a reporter? What you look for reporters. I've done some man on the street interviews for you. Is it very similar that you're looking for that type of person too?
Yeah, absolutely. You're looking at someone who can entertain, but at the same time be able to extract information from the person that he or she is interviewing, as you said, the man on the street type of interview. So it comes down to the personality, and the intelligence is very important. The preparation that someone puts into doing their talk show, the types of guests that they develop and come up with, and the types of show topics. So about 5 different very key ingredients go into making a good talk show host. But I, again, refer back to one of the key ingredients in that mix, and that is the life experience or world experience of a man or a woman and what they bring to a talk show. That makes a lot of difference. You can have someone with a tremendous IQ, a tremendous ability because they're so intelligent, but if they can't relate to things that are happening in the world, if they haven't been there, that really makes the difference of who makes it in the industry and who doesn't.
Yeah, I think so. When you listen to a tape, do you know if someone has it right away? Audition tape over the years?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
And have you ever passed on someone and you regretted it?
Yeah.
I'm not referring to me. I'm not referring to me.
No, there probably have been a few down the road, yeah. But overall, my batting average has been pretty good. I'm very pleased with that. But to answer your question, though, yes, it doesn't take me long to hear those ingredients that I just mentioned in someone's personality in their presentation. Yeah.
With the time we got left, and we only got about a minute or so to go, John, over the years, you have done just about everything, as I've said a number of times on the show. And by the way, we have John Harper on with us, from the president and owner of WMEL 1060 in Cocoa Beach, the Talk to Me station. What have you learned about yourself that you are so proud of all these years later?
I think the patience and understanding of other people has been very important in the way I act and react to different people that I come in contact with on a daily basis. It's understanding what's going on behind the scenes in that person's life that I think has been a key ingredient to my success. Knowing that person inside and out, very, very important, and having the humility as well. I think that's very important.
What's next for you at WMEL, sir?
Oh, there's so many different things. We need another hour for that, but we're looking at expanding into other markets with other radio stations, AM and FM, looking to getting into the cell phone tower business. That's big. That's a whole other interview in itself. Mm-hmm. So a lot of different things that are still going strong. But I think more acquisitions of AM and FM stations and the cell phone tower business. That's what we're looking at here in the coming couple of years.
John, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. Do hang on the phone. Before I say goodnight to everybody, I want to remind you, if you want to catch me on Facebook, you go to Gary Allen, ALAN. If you want to hear any of my past shows, this show will be up in about a week on my youtube.com/Gary Allen The Express Interviews. This show will be repeated at 7 o'clock on diversitybroadcastnetwork.com, as well as progressivevoices.com. And I just want to thank everybody out there from the from wherever you are for always taking a few minutes out of your day to always join us. And John, I've just been informed we got a couple of more minutes to go. I didn't realize that. I thought I was really up against the clock. I'm going to see you tomorrow. We'll have a cup of coffee or something like that. Is there anything you want to say to our listeners before you go? Before I sign off, if anybody's out there thinking about getting into broadcasting, where should they go? College or go to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting?
Oh, I definitely think college is the way to go. If you can find yourself knocking on the door of a radio station in your community, that is an even better way to go. And get the experience from the ground up and do whatever you can inside that radio or TV station to make yourself valuable and to make yourself become an important aspect of what they do on a daily basis. But going to school is very important. I can't say that enough. And by the way, Gary, something that is number one on my list of important things, and that is reading. Reading. Read everything you can if you want to be in this industry of talk radio, or if you want to be in news as well. A newsman, a newswoman, read everything you can, because that is going to make a huge difference in how you can react and respond to different situations versus someone else. So reading, to use the old hackneyed expression, reading is fundamental.
Absolutely. My producer had a question for you. When you were living in Los Angeles, did you know Ronnie Mack?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Talk about that a little bit.
Ronnie was a good talent that I think many times was perhaps underrated and didn't get the type of exposure that I think the Mack family had thought should have been forthcoming. But yet very good talent, very strong,
it's unfortunate that that talent never was able to go on to, I think, national fame and acclaim where it should have gone.
He's apparently on tmvcafe.com, so you might want to catch your show there. I didn't realize that he was on our network. But at any rate, John, again, thank you very much for taking a few minutes out of your day to join us. I appreciate this very much from the bottom of my heart because I know how very busy your schedule is, early morning, late afternoons, and evenings. And again, ladies and gentlemen, catch me on Facebook. Go to youtube.com, Gary Allen, The Express, interviews. Thursday night at 7 o'clock, this program repeats itself on diversitybroadcastnetwork.com, also on progressivevoices.com. And on behalf of all of us here, I want to thank you. John, thank you very much. And, until next time, please take care of yourselves and each other.
You've been listening to The Express with Gary Allen. Join us here every Tuesday night at 10 for more captivating talk with Gary Allen. See you next time on The Express.